Welcome back to Public Speaking for Lawyers. This is program 4, Thinking, Structuring, and Remembering. By the time this program is over, you'll be able to channel the adrenaline time warp so that you can think, structure, and remember what you want to say.
You will also learn that mindful silence is the secret ingredient of public speaking. It allows you to control your pace, and it gives your listeners time to think.
And structured improvisation, not reading and not reciting, will help you think on your feet. Now we've arrived at the larger subject, your brain. Let's ask the question, what's going on inside your brain when you stand to speak in public? And we need to revisit our old friend, adrenaline. Adrenaline not only infuses our whole body with a rush of energy that sends blood flow to the large muscles of our body, it's also flooding our brains. What is the effect, though, up here as opposed to from here down? What's going on in our cerebral cortex and in the deeper structures of our brain that help us or hinder us when we're speaking in public? Let's think what's happening. We get an adrenaline rush when we stand to speak, and suddenly we have a different perception of time. When we get an adrenaline rush and our brain is flooded, we can think about instances where we might have been, say, in an emergency. We're trying now to think, what do people say when we know, by definition, they are experiencing an adrenaline rush? When they're almost in a car accident, or when something really scary happens, they get an adrenaline rush. And they often say, not, oh my gosh, I'm scared, but when that happened, time slowed down. Everything seemed to go into slow motion as I tried to figure out what to do. I'm a pilot and from a family of pilots. When I was a student pilot, I had an emergency. I was flying by myself, signed off by my instructor, just taking off from a little airport with a control tower. My engine quit, and the silence gave me a huge adrenaline rush. I could hear my feet trembling on the rudder pedals as I felt the adrenaline go through my whole body, and then I had to figure out what to do. So as I heard my instructor's words in my ears saying, do a check of all your instruments, I had a funny experience. As I was deciding whether to land in the Mississippi River or in the playground of a nearby school, which didn't seem like a good option, I remembered that recently I had read an article about what to do if you lost your engine at a low altitude. So while I was going through emergency procedures, a whole other part of my brain was figuring out the solution. There was no harm to me or the airplane because I figured out how to make a shallow turn, return to the field, and land safely. All the instructions I had read in the magazine article I had thought of while the emergency was going on. What happened in that moment? Our brain is constantly monitoring our whole body. In normal everyday life, where there's no emergency present, our brain is counting heartbeats and equating them with the passage of each second. So when you're just sitting watching this video, your heart rate is somewhere in the low 60s. And when your brain uses your heart to monitor the passage of time, it's accurate. But when your heart rate accelerates with an adrenaline rush, it shoots up. It could be 120 or 130 beats per second, per minute. And then your brain is still thinking it's counting the passage of seconds. Are you with me here? Your brain is using your heart rate to count the passage of seconds. So when your heart rate accelerates, you feel like more time is passing, even though outside of your own brain, time is passing in a normal way. But for you, you feel time passing much more quickly. In that case, you've entered adrenaline's time warp. This is a place athletes like to hang out, and high performers who know that when they recognize that high heart rate and that rush of adrenaline, they have entered a region of virtual time. In that virtual time, I had time to figure out how to land that airplane because I felt as if I had more time to think. Now, maybe my brain was really speeding up. I don't really care. But there's time to come to a solution. When we're speaking in public and our heart rate increases, we tend to rush into the breach, into all that passage of time that we feel. We feel if we take a pause, our heart might beat 4, 5, or 6 times, that there might be 4, 5, or 6 seconds passing. That to us as the speaker feels like an eternity. However, it's not really 4, 5, or 6 seconds that's passing. It's 1, maybe 2. We're the ones in adrenaline's time warp. We feel that time is rushing ahead and we have to talk faster. And that if we take a pause for even a second, it's too long. Our listeners are oblivious to our conundrum. So here's the thing to remember about adrenaline and your brain. Your heart rate will accelerate, and you'll feel that more time is passing than actually is passing. That makes silence difficult to cope with. We're afraid that the silence is too long and people will think she doesn't know what she wants to say. She's forgotten what she wants to say. She's flummoxed. We'll be embarrassed. We worry what will take place in the silence if we leave it and let too many seconds pass. But the silence is your friend. That's where you can think of what to say next. That's where you think of the next creative thing, or what you thought you couldn't remember, it pops into your head, often during those silences. Listeners like silence because they can process what you're saying. They have that moment to think, oh, that's right, oh, okay. So silence is your friend because that's where you think. It's having the courage to insert silence into speech that's difficult. So when you get that adrenaline rush, what's going on is in your brain is you're suddenly in a time warp that's a gift. It gives you extra time to think, and your audience isn't bothered by it at all.
Let's continue to explore this notion of silence as your friend, silence as a literal part of your style. First, let's talk a little bit about when are you going to get control of that silence? Because everything seems to slow down, the nervous speaker speeds up. So here's how we're going to prevent that from happening. As you are getting your body under control, as you are planting your feet and taking a breath, raising your hands to the ready position and looking at the audience, you are literally, as part of your technique, hearing the silence. Hear the silence right now as I pause. You could really think of that silence is the equivalent for a speaker like the white page for the writer or the blank canvas for the painter. It's this silence that we are now going to use in a very specific way. First of all, we have to hear that silence. And then we have to use that silence, knowing full well that it seems much longer for me, the speaker, than it is for the listener. Silence is when the thinking happens. Not only for you as the speaker, but for your listeners. And I often joke that talking is easy. It's the not talking that is difficult when it comes to public speaking, because pauses seem so long. So we have to very in a very focused way, listen to and look at silence. And I'm quite sure that you have never walked out of a speech from some very effective speaker and thought, wow, that speaker was a master of silence. And yet they so often are. So let's think about silence. Let's focus on silence. Not on what I'm saying, but what I'm not saying. And especially when I'm not saying it. Think about in oratory, in those famous speeches that we hear every year as they cycle around, like Pearl Harbor Day, and the announcement of the attack on Pearl Harbor by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the silence that he used in announcing that despicable attack. How much silence did he have in saying these words? Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, the United States was suddenly and deliberately attacked by the naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. And as he said that, his words were so surrounded by silence to give it that kind of importance, that pregnant pause, that dramatic pause, because it was such a dramatic announcement. There's where silence comes into play. Well, most of us aren't speaking with that kind of oratorical flair about subjects quite that enormous, but silence is so important. So listen to the silence that I'm using. In fact, focus your attention, where I'm snapping my fingers, on this silence between my phrases and my sentences. And ask yourself this question: how is that silence serving me? Because very often, between these phrases and sentences, I need, as every public speaker does, a second to think and answer the question, what's next? If there is no silence, there is no time for thinking. So it's natural to talk fast as a nervous speaker, and by talking fast, you eradicate silence, and by having no silence, there's no time for thinking, and inevitably, there is that cognitive crash and burn. So this silence is so critical for you as the speaker, because you want to be able to have time to contemplate what's next. What's next? And that silence will, of course, seem very long to you, but of course it isn't. Most of the silences I'm using right now are gaps of about a second, separating my phrases and sentences. I have to concentrate to pause longer than that. But think about the fact that as you listen to me, if I pause even for 3 seconds, that doesn't bother you. It's just 3 seconds. When you're the speaker in front of an audience, those 3 seconds, because of the time warp, seem like 10 seconds. And of course, no one can stop for 10 seconds. So that's the dilemma that we are wrestling with here in talking about the time warp. So silence is when the thinking happens. That's why the time warp is good. Instead of your whole life flashing in front of you in that potential life or death moment, when you're in this moment, every available thought, every available word has time to flash through your mind. So just like we're trying to channel adrenaline in the body to be physically more comfortable, we're trying to channel adrenaline in the brain to be cognitively more comfortable, to literally have more time to think, because that's what the time warp gives us. So that's the advantage for you as the speaker. You're answering the question, what's next? What's next? And those short pauses are when you deal with that answer. But now let's focus on your listener, and what are they doing in these silences? Well, there's a particular name for attentive listening, and it is echo memory. And echo memory is what any attentive listener is engaged in, and it's just what it sounds like. It's an echo. As I'm talking, what you're doing is echoing back what I just said. Now play that game with me silently. And notice how it's possible for your very fast brain to echo back everything I just said in these very short silences. That's when the informing, the learning, the persuading happens on the part of your listener. In other words, they need the time to answer the question, what did he just say? At the very moment when you're thinking, what should I say next? So that silence is not just about your thinking, what's next, but their thinking and processing. It allows it to sink in. Let's talk about silence by getting rid of it. You know, we often refer to in one ear and out the other. Well, that's what happens when you speak too fast and your listener has no time to process. So think about the fact that if I really concentrated, I probably could say this a lot faster, and wouldn't that be more valuable to you? Because if I packed much more information into this presentation, you would get a lot more out of it, and of course you wouldn't get a lot more out of it because if I talked this quickly, you'd quickly stop listening. I give up. You might say, I understood every word the guy said, but I understood nothing of what he said because there was no time to process it. It went in one ear and out the other because listening requires processing. It needs to come in and in the echo be processed, percolate down into memory. That light bulb moment, that eureka moment of, I understand. I hope you understand about silence and its absolute importance as a listener. So silence is our friend. Silence is a gift you bestow on your listener, and you need to consciously wrestle with it. You need to think about it before you begin, hear it, and then put it to work. And here's the cognitive reason why. Our brains like information in chunks. That's a very important mantra in this technique involving the brain. Our brains like information in chunks. Say that like I just did in 3 chunks. Now, this concept, chunking, is a term of art in cognitive psychology, and it basically is what it sounds like. Our brains like information to be divided up into chunks. And the silences that separate those chunks are the opportunity for the listener to process what they just heard. As it is time, at the end of each chunk, for the speaker to answer the question, what's next? So our goal is to make silence a conscious part of your technique. And notice this has nothing to do with talking fast or slow. It doesn't do any good to think, now don't talk fast. I often work with speakers who tell me that at the top of their notes they write the words, go slow. Well, the problem with that is, given the time warp, you don't know what fast or slow really is because you're in this state of altered perception because of the time warp. It's much more concrete to say, I'm going to use silence. I'm going to use it to think. I'm going to give it to my listeners so they'll have time to think about what I just said. And if you can do that, consciously incorporate silence into your speaking, then you've got a way for your brain to think and their brains to understand.
You're having an adrenaline rush. You know you'll be in a time warp, but the time warp can be very good for your listeners as you chunk your information. But it all might seem easier if you just read or maybe recite. Wouldn't all those problems of the time warp go away if you just wrote out your presentation and read it to your audience? Please don't. Here's why. When we read aloud, we're frankly not very good at it. We often read too fast. Have you ever gone to a speech at which you heard an address read to you and thought, wow, that was great. I can't wait. I love when people read to me. We just aren't very good readers. We know that actors who read off a teleprompter don't do a very good job even at the Academy Awards. They might have won an Oscar for Best Actor, but when it comes to reading a few simple words off a teleprompter, they're not very good at it. It's just not an innately bestowed gift on very many of us. So we're not very good at reading. And we process reading in a different part of our brains than we want to be using in public speaking anyway. So please put that aside. You'll rarely be called upon to read an address. But what about reciting? That's tempting too. We think, well, I'll just memorize it. Or I'm thinking of what I wrote last night and it's coming out sort of like I wrote it. The problem with reciting is it's very difficult. If you think of, say, actors reciting in a play or in a movie, they have had weeks of rehearsal. They've had a director telling them exactly where to stand and how to feel and where to look when they're reciting certain lines. And in fact, the scripts of plays are skinny. There isn't that much to recite anyway, and even actors struggle sometimes to keep it all in their minds. True verbatim recitation is really difficult. Don't give yourself that assignment. you're not very good at reciting in the same way that you're not good at reading. And in both instances, you're not in the moment present with your listeners. So do what you have been doing your whole life and what you're really, really good at. That is, just talk to the audience. Have notes with trigger words and then talk. You do it all day at work with your colleagues, you do it at night with your family, you do it on the phone. We spend all day talking, and that's what we're really good at. Discard the idea that you might get good at reading and that you might be able to recite something, and revert to talking to your audience. It's the most authentic, genuine thing you can do. Now let's talk about how to structure that.
So if you are not going to use your brain to read or recite, you're going to talk, we need to put a particular kind of label on the kind of talking and thinking that is required. And we call that structured improvisation. Structured improvisation is just what it sounds like. It's tightly structured. In other words, your preparation has a lot to do with organizing your thoughts and the structure of how those thoughts will flow. The improv is you're not going to try to say precisely the same word each time you talk about each of those topics. And your brain is already good at that. Here's an example. If I asked you to tell a personal anecdote of something that happened to you, and because it was funny or bizarre or scary, you not only lived through it, so you know what happened. In other words, there's the structure. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. But you have told that story many times. It's the story you pull out at a party when someone says, "Oh, you won't believe what happened to me one time." So you've practiced it, and it happened to you. You know it very well. If I said, "Tell me one of those stories," you could do that. But if I then said, "Tell that story to that group down the hall," and add one more thing to your telling of it. I would like it to be absolutely verbatim, exactly the way you said it in this room. And of course, you couldn't do that. Not because you didn't know it. You of course know it because it happened to you and you've practiced telling it. But what our brains are good at is saying, well, I'll tell it, but it'll be a little different. I'll bring up some point I forgot. I'll emphasize something else. Some other detail will pop into my mind. That is where you want to be cognitively. That is structured improvisation. And you're already good at it. You've got to trust that. Every conversation you've ever had has not been reading or reciting. It has so often been a structured improv. Think you might say to a colleague, "Oh, we have to talk about yesterday's meeting and tomorrow's seminar." And there's our structure. We've got a meeting, we've got a seminar. Let's together improvise as we talk about that. So that's the cognitive mode we're using, structured improvisation. Now, how do we come up with some notes that will help us do that effectively? Here's the most obvious suggestion I could give you, and in many ways the most important. Don't stand up with little index cards on which you have written small, or a piece of paper on which you've put many, many words written very small in your usual handwritten scrawl. Think of notes as being this. Notes are a visual aid, not for your listener, but for you. So follow the rules of visual aids when you're making notes and make them bigger. And of necessity, make them simpler, which will of course make them easier to read. Now maybe your notes can't be written quite this big, but if you are reading notes that are twice as far away as a book that you might be holding, don't your notes have to be at least twice as big if they're lying on the lectern or on a table as you're presenting? So think of your notes as this. Make them a visual aid for you. And trust that nothing is less helpful than notes that are too extensive. There's nothing less helpful than notes that say, "Good morning, it is a pleasure to be here, my name is." Your brain doesn't need that. What your brain needs is this structure. So here's an even more radical thought about notes, and that is, think about turning your notes sideways. So instead of your notes flowing down the paper as we normally would this way, think of your notes sideways for a couple of reasons. Number one, it allows you to put topic number one, topic number two, topic number three in columns. It forces you to only use trigger words or bullet points to remind you of that structure. It allows you to see the whole structure. And nothing is more glorious as a speaker than to think, "Oh, I can't remember the middle of that third point," and to know exactly where to look on the piece of paper. The other reason to think about horizontal notes is horizontal is how we gesture. Think about it. We don't say, "I'd like to go to the party and I'm too busy. Vertically, I'd like to go to the party, but on the other hand, I'm too busy. We do it horizontally. We think and we gesture on this horizontal shelf, as we discussed earlier. If your notes have that same format of being horizontally arranged, then the way your notes are arranged, the way you are gesturing, and ultimately the way you are thinking all work together. One final thought about the improv. Let's imagine you are, as I am at this moment, behind this piece of furniture. Here's another incredibly obvious suggestion, but so important, and that is this. If you stand behind a lectern or podium and you get close to it, your notes are not easy to read because they're way down here. So there's no way that I can read my notes and talk to you without doing that major head bob. So even when you're behind this piece of furniture, step back. Now I can talk to you and look at my notes, and only my eyes need to make that journey, not my entire head. So as I talk to you, I can look at my notes, which I'm doing. Now I can talk to that part of the audience and look at my notes, which I'm doing. In other words, the notes are so much more usable. But if you tighten yourself up next to this podium and then have to do this, the notes don't help at all. The other problem is that if you're behind this podium and you rest your hands on it, then all your impulses to gesture will disappear into these kind of wing flaps. So step back, put yourself in the ready position, make your notes easy to read, and engage in structured improvisation. That is what your brain is already good at. To remember what you've learned in this program, talk to yourself and say this. Hear the silence in the room before you begin and trust it as you speak. Say that.
Stand back from the lectern so you can easily see your notes. Say that.
The adrenaline rush makes time slow down, so use it to think. Say that.
Insert your first pause after your first phrase, so you set up a rhythm and pace that will help you deal with adrenaline's time warp. Say that.
If you make silence your friend, it will give you the comfort and the confidence to think on your feet.